lawyer's pen scratched across the paper like a death sentence being written in real time. I didn't flinch, didn't argue. I just sat there in that sterile conference room, watching my wife of 32 years sign away our marriage with the same casual indifference she'd shown me for the past 5. "That's it then," Margaret said, not even looking up at me. Her perfectly manicured nails, red, always red, tapped once against the mahogany table before she stood, smoothed her designer skirt, and walked out of my life. I should have felt something. Anger, maybe, grief, the crushing weight of failure, but all I felt was a strange, hollow relief, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and someone had finally pulled me to the surface. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia who'd seen it all, gave me a sympathetic smile. "You could have fought harder, David. The prenup wasn't ironclad. You gave up a lot." "I know," I said, gathering the copies of the papers that would split our assets, our properties, our entire life down the middle, heavily weighted in Margaret's favor. "But some fights aren't worth winning." She didn't understand. How could she? She didn't know that I'd been planning this moment for 6 months, orchestrating my own defeat like a chess player sacrificing his queen. She didn't know about Grandpa Ned. The nursing home smelled like antiseptic and regret, but room 47 always smelled like Old Spice and peppermint candies. Grandpa Ned had been in Shady Pines for 3 years, and I visited him every Thursday without fail. It was during one of those visits, 6 months ago, that everything changed. "You look like hell, boy," Ned had said, his 93-year-old eyes still sharp as tacks behind thick glasses. He was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, working on a crossword puzzle in pen because he was too stubborn to admit he might make mistakes. "Marriage troubles," I'd admitted, slumping into the visitor's chair. "Margaret wants a divorce, says I'm boring, says she needs more excitement in her life." Ned had set down his puzzle and looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like I was 10 years old again, getting caught stealing cookies. "And what do you want?" I'd opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain how I'd tried everything, how I'd planned surprise trips and bought flowers and done all the things the marriage counselor suggested. But the words died in my throat because I realized I didn't know what I wanted anymore. "I want to stop feeling like I'm not enough," I finally said. Grandpa Ned had nodded slowly, then reached for the battered lockbox he kept under his bed. His gnarled fingers worked the combination 32-17-48, his wedding date, and pulled out a worn leather journal. "Your grandmother and I were married for 68 years, he said, his voice taking on that storytelling quality that had captivated me as a child. "And let me tell you something nobody tells you about long marriages, David. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go." He'd handed me the journal. Inside were pages and pages of his handwriting, documenting his life after my grandmother passed. Travels to places they'd always talked about, hobbies he'd picked up, friends he'd made, a whole second act of life that I'd known nothing about because I'd been too wrapped up in my own failing marriage to pay attention. "When your grandmother died, I thought my life was over," Ned continued. "I was 75 years old, what was left? But then I realized something. I'd spent so long being we that I'd forgotten how to be me. Don't misunderstand, I loved your grandmother more than life itself, but I'd lost myself in the loving." "So you're saying I should just give up, let her have everything?" "I'm saying that fighting to keep something that's already gone is like trying to hold water in your fists. You'll just end up exhausted and still thirsty." He'd tapped the journal. "Read this, then decide what you want to fight for." I read every page that night. Grandpa Ned's adventures after Grandma died weren't just about filling time. They were about rediscovery. He'd learned to paint at 76, traveled to Japan at 79, started a book club at the nursing home, taught himself to play the harmonica. Each entry radiated a joy I hadn't seen in my own life for years. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before my visit. "Today I taught young Marcus, the orderly, how to play chess. He beat me in 3 games. I couldn't be prouder. Life isn't about winning, it's about showing up to play, every single day. If David ever reads this, stop clinging to the person who doesn't want to be held. start holding onto yourself. That's when I made my decision. I stopped fighting the divorce. I gave Margaret what she wanted, most of the savings, the house we'd bought in the suburbs, even the vintage car I'd restored. My lawyer thought I was insane. My friends said I was being taken advantage of, but they didn't understand. I wasn't losing, I was choosing. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the doorway of a one-bedroom apartment downtown, surrounded by boxes and possibilities. It wasn't much, just 600 square feet overlooking a busy street, but it was mine. Every book on the shelf, every dish in the cupboard, every choice about what to hang on the walls was completely, entirely mine. I started small, signed up for a cooking class at the community center because Margaret had always insisted on doing all the cooking, said I'd just make a mess. Turned out I had a knack for Thai food, and the instructor, a 60-something woman named Rosa, told me I was a natural. Then I joined Grandpa Ned's book club at Shady Pines. The members, ranging from 70 to 98 years old, welcomed me like I'd always belonged. We argued about Hemingway, laughed over Pratchett, and cried together over The Book Thief. These people had lived entire lifetimes, survived wars and losses and triumphs, and they treated my divorce not as a tragedy, but as a beginning. "You're one of us now," said Elena, a 91-year-old former Broadway dancer, a graduate of the School of Second Chances. I started running again, something I'd given up when Margaret complained about my sweaty gym clothes cluttering the bathroom. 3 mornings a week, I'd jog along the river, watching the sunrise paint the city in gold. My knees protested at first, but eventually my body remembered what it felt like to move with purpose. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with when Margaret decided they were too immature. We started a monthly poker night. We went to baseball games. We had conversations that went nowhere and everywhere, the kind of meandering talks that marriages sometimes forget how to have. But the biggest change came when I discovered woodworking. There was a community workshop in an old converted warehouse, tools available for a modest monthly membership. I'd always been good with my hands, had built my own bookshelves and fixed things around the house, but Margaret had called it playing in the garage and made me feel like a child with a hobby. My first project was a disaster, a crooked cutting board that wouldn't sit flat. My second was worse, but by the 3rd month, I'd built a beautiful walnut box with dovetail joints that fit together like a puzzle. I gave it to Grandpa Ned for his crossword puzzles. He'd cried when he opened it. "You found yourself," he said simply, running his weathered hands over the smooth wood. "I was hopping you wood." 6 months post-divorce, I ran into Margaret at a coffee shop downtown. She was with him, Trevor, the personal trainer she'd left me for, all muscles and whitened teeth and motivational quotes. They were arguing about something in hushed, tense voices. She saw me first, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, regret, I couldn't tell. "David," she said, her voice uncertain, "you look different." I did. I'd lost 15 pounds from all the running. Let my hair grow a bit longer. Started dressing in clothes I actually liked, instead of the conservative button-downs Margaret had always bought for me. "I feel different," I said honestly. "How are you, Margaret?" Trevor excused himself to take a phone call, and Margaret and I stood there in awkward silence for a moment. "I heard you've been taking classes, joining clubs, living downtown," she said finally. There was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. "Sounds like you're doing well." "I am," I said, and meant it. "Really well, actually." "Trevor and I are." She paused, glanced toward where he was packing outside, gesturing animatedly into his phone. "It's been an adjustment." I could see it then, the same exhaustion I'd seen in my own eyes for years. The weight of trying to be someone you're not, of performing happiness instead of feeling it. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said gently, and I meant that too. As I walked away, I felt lighter, not because I'd scored some petty victory or because Margaret seemed less than thrilled with her new life, but because I realized I didn't need her to regret leaving me. I didn't need vindication or revenge or even understanding. I just needed to keep showing up for myself. Last Thursday, I visited Grandpa Ned with a new journal, hand-bound, with pages I'd made myself in a paper-making workshop. Inside the front cover, I'd written, "For Ned, who taught me that the second act can be the best act. Thank you for showing me how to let go and hold on at the same time." He held it like it was made of gold, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "What are you going to write in here?" I asked. "Our story," he said, "about a boy who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters, about a grandpa who got to see him become a man." As I sat with him that afternoon, both of us working on the crossword puzzle together, I realized that letting Margaret divorce me was the best decision I never knew I needed to make. I hadn't lost 32 years. I'd invested them in becoming someone who was finally ready to meet himself. And the man I met, he was worth fighting for.